Everybody, if we could come to order, please. We'll get started. Oh, yeah. If everyone could just grab their seats, please. We got a full night, so we just want to get started here. All right. Good evening, everyone. I first of all want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. We are going to continue with the study of C85. I have a bit of a preamble here, so please bear with me. Welcome to today's meeting on Bill C81, I should say, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. The objective of today's meeting is to continue the committee's thorough review of the bill. I would like to take a moment to remind both those participating in the proceedings, as well as those observing the proceedings of the committee in person and on video, that the committee adopted a motion on September 18th, which included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for the full participation of all witnesses and members of the public on this study. As a result, the committee has made arrangements to make all meetings in relation to the study of Bill C81 as accessible as possible in a variety of ways. This includes providing sign language interpretation and near real-time closed captioning in the room. Please note that both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language are being offered to those in our audience. For those who would like to watch the American Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my left. For those who would like to watch Quebec Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my right. In addition, please note that the first two rows of benches have been reserved for those who wish to avail themselves of these interpretation services. Screens displaying the near real-time closed captioning have also been set up with the English text to my left and the French text to my right. The sign language interpreters in the room are also being video recorded for the eventual broadcast of the meeting on Parleview via the committee's website. In light of these arrangements, the committee would ask that if you need to leave the room during the meeting, please do not walk in front of the sign language interpreters. Instead, please use the extremities of the room. In addition, we would ask that those in the room remain seated as much as possible during the meeting, so that everyone in attendance can clearly see the sign language interpretation. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. I will also add that ask not only the witnesses present today and appearing via video conference, but also remind all of my colleagues to keep your speech at a slow pace to allow the interpreters to do their job and be able to keep up. If at any time I see anybody's maybe going a little bit too fast, I will interrupt. So I apologize in advance. But we want to make sure that your words are captured by the interpreters throughout the meeting. I'm very pleased to welcome our first panel here this evening, coming to us via the Vancouver Airport Authority. From the Vancouver Airport Authority via video conference from Vancouver, British Columbia, Mr. Craig Richmond, President and Executive Officer. Can you hear me okay, sir?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. We also have in attendance here today from the Canadian Transportation Agency, Mr. Scott Striner, Chair and Chief Executive Officer. And also from Via Rail Canada, we have Yves Desjardins-Siciliano, President and Chief Executive Officer, and John Nicola Morello, Senior Legal Counsel, Legal and Corporate Affairs. Welcome to all of you. We're going to start this first round with 5-minute statements and then rounds of questions. Is it 5 or 7? 5-minute statements. Okay. And first up, we have Mr. Richmond. The first 5-minute statements, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk about accessibility. I'd like to provide you with a broad perspective on behalf of the airport community, because it's an important topic that will impact us all. First, I'd like to give some context quickly. As you may know, most Canadian airports are managed by local, not-for-profit organizations. Under this unique model, we do not receive any money from the government. Instead, we operate as private companies, having to compete and innovate to stay ahead of the competition. However, we are not beholden to shareholders. We reinvest all profits back into our airports, which allows for constant improvements. And underpinning this is a commitment to provide an exceptional experience for everyone. YVR has become a model of accessibility and inclusion because we believe that everyone who wants to fly should be able to fly, and everyone who wants to work at the airport should have that opportunity. We have spent the last 25 years making our airport barrier-free. For instance, we have universal food and service counters that welcome people using wheeled mobility devices. We use low-resistance carpeting on our floors for easier movement and greater stability. We work with a range of partners to ensure that YVR meets high standards through terminal audits. We host experiential tours to test our facilities. This includes a tour for families living with autism and a tour for those living with spinal cord injuries. We also address non-visible disabilities. For instance, we just introduced our FlyCalm initiative with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and this program helps travelers de-stress prior to air travel. In addition to making our airport barrier-free, we also strive for employment equity. We've been named one of Canada's best diversity employers, and just recently, the federal government has recognized our achievement with the Sector Distinction and Employment Equity Champion Awards. We've gotten to this point because we set equity targets, closely monitor them, and take action. Currently, women make up 42% of our workforce, visible minorities make up 33%, Aboriginal peoples almost 2%, and persons with disabilities 3%. In fact, persons with disabilities this year make up 4.8% of our hires. Yes, we have work to do, but we're heading in the right direction. We also have a large range of programs to promote a diverse workplace, and we have overhauled our procurement process, looking at how we can reward companies that value diversity. So we're doing a lot, and of course, there's always a lot more to do, and that brings me to Bill C-81. Overall, we're very happy to see a bill of this nature and believe it's about time. The preceding is to let you know that we are not afraid of the bill. We're ready. However, I'm worried that the bill is a bit heavy-handed. It also presents possibly significant administrative burdens, and I believe we'll run into some major issues applying standards. Additional feedback and reporting requirements in the bill would add a considerable burden, even more challenging when we consider the differences among airports. There are a lot of small airports that don't have the resources that we do. These airports would be much better off spending funds to install accessibility ramps than producing reports. For them, it's often one or the other. It brings me to the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization. Do we really need this to do what's needed? My concern is duplication and redundancy with what other organizations are already doing, for example, in the built environment. How can we leverage what already exists rather than creating another body that will bring more costs and bureaucracy? An alternative would be to bring in organizations who are already doing accreditation. This could start with a general visit and not a compliance audit. For instance, we just got certified at YVR at the Vancouver Airport with the Rick Hansen Foundation. I also agree it's important to set standards and hold everyone accountable, and ultimately, of course, the way to ensure that is through fines. However, fines should be the last resort. I'm co-chair of the President's Group, a network of business leaders in Vancouver committed to improving employment outcomes for people with disabilities in BC. One reason the group was formed was to find a less punitive way to get organizations to comply. So my question is, how much of a hard stance will we take on fines? Is there a grace period to implement the measures needed? And if so, how long is it? The reality is that there will always be areas in which we are underperforming. We're never fully compliant, and nobody is. We're always evolving our buildings, and so grandfathering is very much an issue. We're committed to getting it right, but the solutions are often expensive and time-consuming. In conclusion, overall, we support the bill and think will go a long way to removing barriers and improving accessibility across Canada. I look forward to working with you to further improve our accessibility, and thank you for providing me with the opportunity to voice YVR's perspective today.
Thank you very much, sir. Before we go on, just a reminder, if we keep our pace a little bit slow, that would be great. I have not been very heavy-handed this session with the timing, so if you go over a little bit, it's not the end of the world. So just keep that in mind. Up next from the Canadian Transportation Agency, Mr. Scott Striner, Chair and Chief Executive Officer. The next 5 minutes are all yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting me here today. Je suis heureux d'être ici.
It is a pleasure to be here today to provide an overview of the Canadian Transportation Agency's CTA, accessibility-related responsibilities and activities as part of the committee's hearings into Bill C-81, the proposed Accessible Canada Act.
The Canadian Transportation Agency, the CTA, has been around since 1904. We are Canada's longest-standing independent expert tribunal and regulator. In 1988, our enabling legislation was amended to add accessible transportation as one of our core mandates. As the Supreme Court of Canada said in a 2007 ruling upholding one of our decisions, quote, Parliament charged the agency, the Canadian Transportation Agency, with the public responsibility for assessing barriers because the agency uniquely has the specialized expertise to balance the requirements of persons with disabilities with the practical realities of a federal transportation system. Ensuring that Canadians with disabilities are able to travel independently and with dignity is in the CTA's DNA. We all know that transportation services are integral to modern life, whether we're going to visit family, see new places, or conduct business. As the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities states, transportation services to which persons with disabilities have equal access are, quote, enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully in all aspects of life. The CTA's vision is to make Canada's national transportation system the most accessible in the world. Now, we know that this is an ambitious vision, but we believe that in a country whose fundamental values include equality and inclusion, we should aspire to nothing less. Nous prenons des mesures importantes.
We are taking major steps to translate that vision into reality. Let me briefly highlight 4 examples. First, in 2016, we established the CTA's Center of Expertise for Accessible Transportation, which serves as the hub of activity within and beyond the CTA for all matters related to the removal of barriers to persons with disabilities in the national transportation system.
Our second action relates to regulation. Following 2 years of intensive consultations with disability rights organizations and industry, we're drafting new accessible transportation regulations that will integrate 2 existing regulations and 6 voluntary codes into a single, robust, binding, and enforceable instrument. The consultative process included multiple discussions with our Accessibility Advisory Committee, several of whose members are actually here today, which brings together 19 disability rights groups, plus representatives from the air, passenger rail, and interprovincial bus and ferry sectors. We hope to have the new accessible transportation regulations ready for publication in the Canada Gazette in early 2019. Third, we've organized multi-stakeholder discussions, including a working group, focused on the significant and growing challenges associated with the transportation and storage of wheelchairs and other mobility aids on aircraft. That working group's recommendations are expected to be ready by the spring. And finally, together with our partners in Global Affairs Canada and Transport Canada, we're spearheading efforts to give accessible air travel profile within the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. And one of our goals is to make sure that accessible air travel figures prominently on ICAO's agenda during its triennial General Conference next September in Montreal. Nous nous préparons également à la
We are also getting ready to implement Bill C-81 should it be passed. We're putting the pieces in place for the launch of a proactive education and compliance monitoring and enforcement program within 60 days of royal assent.
We're revising the standard wording that we apply to accessibility adjudications to reflect the language of Bill C-81. And we've held discussions with the other implementation bodies named in the law, in the bill, to begin working towards coherent, well-aligned approaches to the delivery of our respective accessibility mandates. Accessible transportation is a fundamental human right. The CTA is committed to ensuring that this right is realized in practice through clarity of purpose and concrete action. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And now from Via Rail Canada, we have Yves Desjardins Siciliano, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Jean-Nicolas Morello, Senior Legal Counsel, Legal and Corporate Affairs. 5 minutes, sir.
Alors, bonsoir, Monsieur le...
Good day, Mr. Chair and MPs. Thank you for welcoming Via Rail and my colleague and myself to comment on the bill. It is an ambitious bill, yet an important one for accessibility. Via Rail did not expect the arrival of this bill to ensure service to 4.4 million passengers. Whether they have accessibility issues or not, we want to ensure that our services are available to Canadians, to ensure that transportation services are available to Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We know that 1 out of every 7 Canadians report having a disability, so it is important to ensure that if we want to have an inclusive society, that these people have access, be it for family, for business, for pleasure, or other reasons, that they can see the Canadian countryside, that they have safe and secure services.
Not only are we confident that we can meet the requirements of the proposed legislation, we've been acting with the intention of doing what that act purports to do. En effet, la mobilité inclusive et
In fact, inclusive and sustainable mobility is central to Via Rail's mandate, which is to always better serve Canadians.
by anticipating the mobility needs of people with disabilities and increasing the space available to them over the past few years. More than 1,450 accessible spaces have been added on board our trains since 2014. At present, our capacity to accommodate Canadians with disability is already 6 times greater than it was just a few years ago. To ensure that our services go beyond what is already in place, thanks to the Government of Canada, Via Rail has invested more than $162 million since 2010 in the following areas. On our trains, we just recently awarded a contract for $54 million to make 17 cars fully accessible on the oldest generation of Via Rail trains that cover the country from one ocean to the other, all the way to Churchill, Manitoba. We've consulted groups in devising the new functionality that makes those cars accessible, and as well, again, thanks to Budget 2018, we are in the midst of procuring a totally new fleet to serve the busiest corridor between Quebec City and Windsor, where we currently serve over 4.5 million Canadians. That fleet will be totally accessible. And I want to salute in this room today Bob Brown, a member of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, who with his colleagues from the Council and other organizations representing people with disabilities have met with VIA to set out the specifications required to adapt to their disabilities, and as well, I've been part of the visits we've made to manufacturers to ensure that the product that is being designed meets those requirements. Here in Ottawa, over the last 2 years, we've spent $20 million to retrofit the Ottawa station which we want to see as a model of universal access, not only here in Via Rail's network, but around the world. We are currently working with the Union Internationale des Chemins de Fer to devise a way for people with blindness or other sight disabilities to find their way from door all the way to their train seat without the aid of other individuals, providing them not only mobility, but freedom. The introduction of a continuous improvement process at VIA to ensure greater accessibility is part of our DNA, to use Scott Striner's expression. We've already become, in our view, a world leader in accessibility. As we celebrate our 40th anniversary, as I said, we're just about to procure a new fleet that will be 21st century in terms of accessibility. We've also proposed to build a dedicated infrastructure for Via Rail services between Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. That high-frequency rail network would also provide universal accessibility, not only on its cars, but all of its stations. And because it will be fully accessible and fully available to Via Rail services, it will provide 3 times the number of frequencies that we have today on freight networks, making greater accessibility in a broader sense available to all Canadians. Mais en tant qu'employeur, Via Rail est tout.
As an employer, Via Rail is also concerned with the importance of recognizing the need for integration of disabilities into our workforce, and that is why, as Chair and CEO of Via Rail, my objective in my annual objectives is to include a number of handicapped individuals among our new recruits. At present, we have more than 3% of our staff who are individuals with handicaps. We have an objective this year of maintaining the course on that percentage. For 2018, my personal goal, is to have more than 32% of individuals coming from diverse communities, including those with handicaps. We are already at 42% in terms of that objective.
Ça veut dire présentement que nous avons cette année seulement engagé 12.
We have hired 12 people with a handicap who will join our Via Rail employees. At Via Rail, we recognize that we are an important pillar of inclusion and sustainable mobility, and we recognize the equality of all Canadians. They need to fully live freely as Canadians, not just in their thoughts and their beliefs, but also in terms of their own mobility. That is why we are committed to ensuring that not only will we meet the objectives under the legislation, the important legislation you are discussing today, but also to exceed those expectations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Up first for questions, we have MP Finley for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the last few years, I spent about 2 of those years traveling across the country with the aid of at least a cane, often a walker or a wheelchair. And one thing I noticed was dramatic differences between the accessibility in different airports in particular. For example, here in Ottawa, if anyone tries to drop you off at the airport in a car, when they go in to get a wheelchair for you, the parking police come along to give you a ticket. If you go to Toronto, the wheelchairs are at the very back of the terminal. And same deal, you're not allowed to stop and wait while somebody goes and gets your wheelchair. In other places, the airlines say that it's the delivery of the services up to them. They'll come right up to the curb and pick you up, but there's no consistency. Would this bill change that? And if so, how?
Mr. Chair, perhaps I can provide an initial response. The issue of wheelchair services is one which we at the Canadian Transportation Agency have seen crop up again and again. It is actually, of all of the different issues around which we receive accessibility-related complaints, it's the most common topic. And we also, as I noted in my opening remarks, recognize that the transportation of wheelchairs and other mobility devices on aircraft is becoming a more and more challenging issue. And that's because, you know, there's a positive development. Wheelchairs are becoming larger, they're becoming more technologically complex and more customized. So they're better at meeting the needs of the individual traveler. But that means that it can sometimes be more challenging to transport them, to store them on aircraft. And that's the reason why we set up a multi-stakeholder working group to deal with this. Now, the member asked about whether positive change is coming. So what I can say is that the CTA has been working for several years now on its new accessible transportation regulations, which will include a section on the obligations of airports and airlines in respect of the provision of wheelchair services. Those provisions should help to ensure more consistent service delivery and better quality service delivery. So I think that we're confident after 2 years of consultations and development that these new regulations will help to make a positive difference in the area that you've identified as one of concern.
It's totally inconsistent right now. Just never know what to expect. Mr. Richmond, I don't know if you have any comments on that. I know you've worked in many different airports around the world, whether you have comments on that. And if so, I'd welcome them. But also, I'm wondering, because you did refer to smaller airports, what you anticipate would be the impact on these airports of the unfunded mandate that would be inherent in the passage of C-81.
Thank you very much. I would just like to state that, as Mr. Striner said, it's a growing issue, especially as we have an aging population all over the world. It's not uncommon for us now to have requests for 50, 75, or 100 wheelchairs to meet airplanes from certain areas of the world. And we have seen as many as 150 requests off one aircraft, which is more than all the wheelchairs we have in the airport. So we are working at the airport to try and grapple with this problem as well. In Vancouver, there are actually places where you can drop off or be picked up that are very accessible with wheelchairs nearby. I wanted to highlight my colleagues at smaller airports, not because I don't think that they do a good job. In fact, I think a lot of the smaller ones, it's much easier to do a good job. And I think that since over the past 2 decades, as I look at airports from coast to coast, they are much more accessible than they were in the past. Everybody has incorporated accessibility into their standards. You're right, though, it is not as consistent as it might be across the country.
And what do you see as the financial impact of this unfunded mandate on particularly smaller airports?
That's a good question, and that's why I raised it. I think that for the most part, anybody who's built a new terminal, and most airports in Canada are new, have conformed to CSA B651, which is a very good built environment code. I don't know about what will happen if airports are mandated to be standing at the curb with wheelchairs. That to me could be quite a serious cost for smaller airports and large airports. Also, I think that whatever we can do to make the reporting requirements under this bill as reasonable as possible, I think would go a long way. Many of the small airports in Canada run with a staff of 20 people, and they do all kinds of jobs. And having to add more reports just adds more cost and more difficulties to small airports. I'm not worried so much at the large airport, but obviously we wouldn't want it to be onerous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Striner, you said that you want Canada to be the best in the world, which suggests that we're not right now. So I'd ask you, who is the best, and what do they do that's so terrific that to which we should aspire?
Very, very brief answer, please.
My very brief answer is different countries are very successful in different areas. I didn't mean to suggest, Mr. Chair, that Canada isn't a leader in some respects in the area of accessibility. But there are certainly other countries that we can learn from. We can learn from both the successes and the failures, for example, of a piece of legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act. That legislation contributed to significant improvements in accessibility in some areas, but there were also some challenges with its implementation. So we try to learn from the lessons of every jurisdiction that has attempted to advance this issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now over to MP Hogue for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to all of the witnesses. You all seem to have a positive outlook in terms of the directions you're taking and feeling quite comfortable with that. I'm just following up on MP Finley's comment or question with respect to referencing. I was wondering how you're going to tell that. The question she stole right out of my mouth in terms of when you said you wanted to be the best in the world, which clearly we'd like to be. How are you going to, you've referenced some areas that we are worse in, some that we're in better in. What are the areas we need to look at, and what impact would this bill have in terms of being able to turn those around?
So I think what I would say is in respect of transportation, we have a number of areas in Canada where we clearly are ahead of the curve. We were one of the first countries, for example, to implement mandatory training requirements in the personnel training regulations that we currently have at the Canadian Transportation Agency. While those regulations aren't perfect, they drew the attention of service providers to the need to ensure not only that the built environment is accessible, not only that there's the right equipment, but that personnel are trained in order to interact appropriately with and provide services to people with disabilities. In other areas, we face some significant challenges. What I would say is there are a few ingredients, I think, to advancing this agenda forward. One of them is to have a set of modern regulations that actually draw upon Canada's experience over the last 25 years since the CTA first got its accessibility mandate. And as I said in response to the member's question, best practices in other countries. Our work on those regulations is well advanced. Bill C-81 will reinforce our regulation-making power, but we already have that power, and it's pursuant to the current power that we've been working on these regulations. But regulations by themselves are a start. They're not enough. There are other ingredients required. We need a strong, proactive compliance assurance program. At the CTA, we've been working on creating a program which is risk-based so that we will target our efforts in those areas where the risk of noncompliance or the impact of noncompliance is highest. Bill C-81 adds to the CTA's compliance toolkit. It gives our compliance enforcement officers additional tools to get out there and to ensure that people are complying. And then I think that the third leg, very briefly, is information. It's making sure that both persons with disabilities and service providers know what their rights and responsibilities are. And so in addition to a compliance program, the CTA is planning to undertake, should the bill be passed, a very proactive information program with those communities.
I'm assuming that there is some type of concurrence around the world with respect to what best practices are and how those are, so that we actually know what we're implementing. If I can go quickly to Craig Richmond, I want to get on the record to say hi to your dad, who was the Speaker of the House when I was in the legislature, and to your sister, who was my ministerial assistant for a number of years. So please pass along my best wishes to them. I haven't been able to find Valerie's number recently. You made reference to thinking that going to legislation was maybe a bit premature, that there was a lot of processes by which we might look at changing and shifting accessibility, inclusion, and I assume from that you're talking about how we change the culture and how the culture starts to change. Can you talk about the changes that have been made at YVR with respect to the culture, particularly in response to, well, I should speak more slowly, particularly in response to what happens with staff? I know in some areas I've talked to, the staff have been reluctant to respond to some of those initiatives. So what is the process of the culture changing so that there's not a disparity between the culture, values, and principles and how those are reflected in the legislation?
Well, thank you for that. Actually, I'm not opposed to legislation. I just hope that, as Mr. Striner said, there's a lot of information out there, and that it doesn't come across, and compliance audits are very heavy-handed from the very beginning, especially at airports that may be a little bit behind. I think also we have to think about the fact that, you know, our building, for example, is the largest building in BC, and it's constantly growing. And so we're going to have we're going to need some grandfathering because we can't constantly keep it up to the latest standards. So we have that in many other aspects of the building, but not in terms of accessibility because there's been no standard before. I think the culture is a good point. Something we're very proud of at Vancouver is the culture, and it all begins with empathy. We do a lot of training. Our employees are very encouraged, and about 80% of them have spent a half a day in a wheelchair. They spend time with vision blocking devices to see what that's like. I know that the airlines do the same kind of training, and I think actually there is a tremendous amount of empathy for the passenger who's traveling with disabilities. So our culture goes back to the formation of the Airport Authority back in 1992. I've always been very impressed when I was there as a young person with the attention and care that everybody from the airport to the airline is trying to take for persons with disabilities.
Thank you. To Mr. Desjardins-Siciliano, you made reference to the retrofit that you're making in the Ottawa station and that you want to see that as being the most accessible in the world. Can you describe what that would look like in terms of how different it is now? And I assume that in order to make that statement, you've looked at some of the other stations around the world. So what are the changes that you'll make to make that accessible? And then,
Well, so
He's
the
giving me about
changes
30 seconds, I'm afraid.
So the changes that have been made include a level boarding platform, and so they're eliminating steps or elevators to get into the train itself. The construction of elevators to allow movement between the floors of the train station.
else in the world?
They don't. Well, no, they don't exist in the Ottawa station. My point is the combination of all of these, plus the element that I mentioned in terms of people with sight impairments, that is new and does not exist anywhere in the world today.
Thank you.
Thank you. MP Hardcastle, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, gentlemen, I'm sure you're aware, if you've read Bill C-81 right now, there are no requirements, there are no timelines right now. And your jurisdiction in particular in transportation is exempt, and you do not have to offer a rationalization for a decision. There's no appeal process for a person in the disability community. Do you think that needs to change before we actually pass C-81?
I want to be sure, Mr. Chair, that I understand the question. So let me perhaps I can give an initial answer, and then if the member feels I haven't responded.
I can repeat it.
Certainly.
Right now,
Yep.
there is an exemption. You can be exempt
It's an exemption power, right? Okay.
without giving a reason, without giving a rationale. So that if there is a civil activist, if there was someone in the disability community that wants to understand your decision, if any civil society member wants to understand the decision, you don't have to give that rationalization. So do you believe that any aspect of that should change before C-81 is actually brought to fruition as our first National Accessibility Act?
So I want to thank the member for her question. Let me just preface my answer by saying that as the chair of an independent tribunal, I don't presume to pronounce on policy choices made by the government when it advances legislation or decisions that Parliament will make on the legislation. So I'll talk a bit about what we do now and how we use our powers. But as to your question, should the bill change, I'll defer to parliamentarians and to ministers on that.
Okay. I'm
Certainly.
very limited. Forgive me. I'm extremely limited in my time. I'm the only member of the NDP caucus that sits on this committee, and I'm very, very limited to the perspective that I want to bring forward. So having said that, I don't need to understand where you're at now. So with the bill, you did mention that you are looking towards binding and enforceable regulations. Maybe you can expand on that, and perhaps we can get some of those perspectives on how we can move forward with improvements to binding and enforceable regulation.
Absolutely. So the only thing I'll say about exemptions is we actually currently have an exemption power in the law, which we have never used, just so that you know. In terms of the regulations that we're working on will, as I said, integrate 2 existing regulations and 6 voluntary codes into a single binding regulation that builds upon the lessons that we've learned and the feedback we've received from disability rights organizations and transportation service providers. Those regulations will cover everything from service delivery to facilities, to equipment, to training, to communications, to reporting. Comprehensive regulations across the board, fully enforceable through administrative monetary penalties. The work on those regulations is well advanced. On October the 1st, we had a special ad hoc meeting of our Accessibility Advisory Committee, received some final rounds of feedback from its members, and we are looking forward to finalizing those regulations and to rolling them out in 2019.
Gentlemen, anybody else want to talk about enforcement or binding regulation? How should we be proceeding with that under C81?
Well, I'll just
Mr.
say,
Richmond, yes, Mr. Richmond, you were concerned about how heavy-handed this was, C81 is right now. So maybe you can elaborate on areas that you think we need to be looking to proceed successfully.
well, I think that I really liked, as I said, when Mr. Striner talked about information packages. If an airport, I'm speaking for airports now, if an airport is falling short in some important aspect of accessibility, I think we would have heard by now, but you never know. If so, to give a lot of information and a lot of opportunity for the airport to voluntarily fix what is wrong. And as I said, sometimes that may take some time. Sometimes it's about grandfathering. For example, going back and fixing a terminal that might be full of asbestos might be a real problem, and you're just going to say, look, I'll wait until I'm going to demolish that part of the terminal. So having some flexibility, I think, is a good idea. But I'm not saying that to get out of doing the right thing. In fact, without any legislation, I would always make available our rationale for making decisions in the built environment. So I would do that voluntarily already.
And what about timelines? In order, this bill right now doesn't have any timelines in order to move forward. You probably have some insight. Mr. Richmond, you mentioned about grandfathering. I think a few of you have mentioned about having a grace period to implement. Can anybody elaborate on your thoughts on how you think we can be moving forward to make amendments that improve this so that it is successful when we implement it?
Very, very quick answer, please.
If it's helpful to the member, the regulations that we're currently working on do have coming into force timelines by which regulated entities will have to comply with all of the regulatory requirements. So those are already in the regulations that we've drafted.
Is there a grace period in grandfathering?
There is a transition period for certain requirements where something new is coming in, but for requirements that have been long-standing, they would simply roll over into the new regulations.
Thank you very much. MP Rumi, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. Mr. Richmond, sorry. Obviously, I'm from BC. I love our airport. It's a fantastic airport. Probably the best airport in Canada, but I'm biased. It is actually quite impressive to see the amount of progress that's made. When we look at what we want to accomplish, the question is, do we legislate it? Do we regulate it? All these questions. But really, some of the top organizations are already doing things. In fact, I remember coming back from a trip from overseas a couple of months ago, and I saw a whole bunch of your employees in wheelchairs going through their training. And I asked, what's going on here? And it was amazing to see that you're putting people through the process of what it's like to be in that wheelchair, what it's like for people who are actually paralyzed, who have challenges. What are those challenges that they're facing? So I guess the first question I have for you is what made you get to that point? Because nobody came down with a hammer and said, do this.
Appreciate the kind words. It's just been in our DNA from the very beginning. That term's been used. The idea that our people should understand what it's like, and in everything that we do, we try to put ourselves in other people's shoes. So, for example, working with, again, the Rick Hansen Foundation, we realize that people with assistant dogs, once they go through all of the various steps, for example, to go to the United States, if their dog has to go to the washroom, what do? So we put in a doggy washroom in Transborder. And to me, it's just customer service. Persons with disabilities are a big part of our customer base. We're just trying to look after them.
And which I think is fantastic. I mean, those are some of the best practices that we see across the country. A lot has been mentioned today, as well as in previous testimony, about timelines. When will we get this thing done? And we've chosen an approach of creating the framework that we could work within. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we need to be coming down and saying you have to have this done by this time? Because I know that you mentioned the cost that you might not be in a position to do things. So what would you say to those timelines?
I'd have to see the actual regulations, and I'm sure that we'll have all kinds of time to talk to the CTA about it. I know that my work in other areas with persons with disabilities is that generally businesses want to do the right thing, I think. I don't disagree. You have to have that ultimate hammer of the fines. But if we can just make sure that what we're looking for in the first case is information and dialogue and not jumping right to compliance and fining.
So you would like to see flexibility rather than a hard cap on a timeline, like this has to be done by 2020 or 2025, whatever that might be?
Well, certainly, and again, as I said in my remarks, I'm not afraid of this legislation. I mean, we've been accessible for a long time, and I think if there are any areas for us to improve, we'll actually embrace those. I think there's a lot of smaller entities out there that could be faced with a pretty stiff, as the other person said, the other MP said, Ms. Findlay, unfunded obligations. So I worry about all of those smaller airports that feed Vancouver inside BC.
So speaking of unfunded, I keep hearing, what's the cost going to be? What's the cost going to be? With where you are already at with your airport, and I know where you're at. Does that bring you a competitive advantage? And if so, where?
Well, we certainly hope so. We want to be known. I think we're getting known around the world as a very accessible airport, regardless of your handicap, regardless of your abilities. And I think it does give us a competitive advantage. I think airlines know that we'll look after their passengers. So we don't look at it as a cost. We look at it as a cost of doing business.
Are you seeing an uptake on tourism, accessibility tourism through your airport?
I think we are. It can be a little bit difficult to measure, but I think when I talk to various groups, they know through their communities and say internet forums around the world, they know the places you want to avoid, and we're certainly not in that category. People feel comfortable transiting through our airport.
So finally, I just want to keep sticking to this advantage because while obviously there's always going to be a cost to things, but we have to start thinking about the advantage to doing the right thing. And we know, and I mean, you said it, you had a plane, 150 wheelchairs. People are no longer confined to their homes, we hope. And
right.
When we look at tourism throughout the country, when we look at tourism throughout the world, there is a lot of people that are now wanting to, whether they're in a wheelchair, wanting to be able to experience life. And to have that advantage, I think, can help pay for it in itself. If we as a country have these standards that allow freedom of mobility, then I think that's our competitive advantage for tourism as well. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree, and I worry about imposing a solution. Say, for example, we have to build a new transborder terminal. If we're told, okay, do this on the old terminal now, well, that's just going to be money that's thrown away. If in 4 years from now we have another part of the terminal that's opening up, so a little flexibility would go a long way.
That's the flexibility that you're referring to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Dion, for 6 minutes, please.
This is for Mr. Desjardins Siciliano. You talked about VIA striving to be or being a world leader in accessibility, and so that's you should be lauded for that. But you said that you use standards from the Canadian Council for Disabilities to get there, and these standards were deemed acceptable to you. So could you please comment on the provision in this bill for multiple more years of further consultation to determine standards?
Well, thank you. Well, I was referring to the fact that at VIA we try to consult clients before we make major changes to our business practices, and therefore this client group was consulted in the design of the refit that we're doing on the old equipment to make it more accessible, as well as the design points for the new equipment that we're procuring for the corridor. So the And I must recognize the work of the Canadian Transportation Agency under the leadership of Mr. Striner, who really are part of that process. They monitor, sometimes they mediate the process in terms of making sure we have all the right parties around the table, provide an objective environment where we can have these consultations. But it has evolved from that regulatory, if you will, environment to one of collaboration between a provider of a service and a customer base. And one point that's not to be lost here is that by 2030, over 25% of Canadians will be over 65. And as I'm getting to that point myself, the reality is that mobility becomes a challenge, not just from a physical aspect, but whether it be eyesight or hearing impairments and other impairments. And therefore, we have to address these issues because our business depends on it. These are a huge customer segment that you can't just leave at home. So now the fact that we're a public body and by definition we're meant to provide services that private enterprises may be more hesitant to provide does not take away from the commercial opportunity of being a better provider for that audience and target. So the consultation process, I think, exists today within the realm of the CTA or within the realm of the actual business providers.
So it's rather redundant then. You also talked about Via Rail being door-to-door accessible, but we do know that not every train station is accessible. I see one in Trenton, Ontario right here where it doesn't have an elevator or it doesn't have any ramps. So I'm not certain this would be necessarily unique. Will this legislation address issues such as this?
Well, so in situations where an elevator is not available to board a wheelchair on a train, Via provides ground transportation from the nearest train station from the traveler to the train station equipped to lift the chair onto the train at no cost to that person. So that's the way it is handled today. Whether this legislation would change that for an existing environment is to be seen. But it is in our objective to make all of our stations accessible, starting with the fact that the new trains will have onboard elevators, eliminating the need to have an off-board elevator that somebody needs to bring to the train and lift the chair. The elevator will be in the train. When the door opens, the elevator will come out of the train, go down to the platform, and raise the chair onto the train, eliminating the current constraints. And that, by the way, is world leading.
Okay. And just a quick question for Craig Richmond. I think one of the takeaways I'm getting from your opening remarks, you talked about building accessibility, not bureaucracy and more red tape. Obviously, more reporting is going to really bog everything down, and I get your argument that we should be spending money instead on making smaller airports and so forth accessible. So can you comment a little bit more, get into a bit more depth on that?
Well, again, and I'm speaking for my colleagues from the Small Airport Caucus of the Canadian Airport Council. Every time that a regulatory burden falls on them, it's a lot harder. They don't have the kind of staff that we do at the top 8 airports in Canada. So I just worry that if we're going to have reporting requirements, we make them as reasonable, as templated as possible, so that small airports aren't spending an inordinate amount of money and time reporting on what they're doing, and rather just doing it.
Do you find that there's a lot of red tape and so forth already?
I live in a very bureaucratic environment. We're going through, for example, my ground lease says every 5 years I have to do a full report on how we're doing, and it costs a lot of money. In fact, we hire 2 consultants to come in and do it for us because we're too busy. So, again, I'm not moaning too badly about that, but I worry about my colleagues at the smaller airports.
Right, so it's money better spent on actually doing accessibility. How am I doing on time?
About 10
really
seconds.
quick question to Scott Striner. You were talking about countries that have best practices. And can you spell out precisely a few of these countries that might be better than us in certain areas and specify?
Very, very quickly, please.
I think it might, this question has actually arisen several times. I think it might be better, Mr. Chair, if we could actually send perhaps a letter with a couple of examples of that, because the committee has asked. I'll simply note one example, which is that there are a number of airports both in Europe and in Asia where the guiding services and the services for persons with disabilities to get through the airport, the wayfinding services, are first class. But if it's helpful to the committee, we'll send a letter with a few additional examples.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you. MP Morrissey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Language that I've heard from the witness today, and you represent major organizations in the country, is you're confident that you can meet the objectives. You're not afraid of the bill. It's ambitious. The question I would have is there challenges in your day-to-day activities that the bill does not address? Mr. Strickler? You're at the CTA.
So, of course, we're in a different position than my colleagues today, because we're the regulator and the tribunal. I think what I would say in response to the member's question, Mr. Chair, is that the bill is offering us a number of new tools. We've had a responsibility for making the national transportation system more accessible since 1988. I think we've made terrific progress, but there's still significant distance to be covered. The bill provides us with some additional tools to advance those objectives.
Okay. How do you see this legislation complementing your pending regulatory changes? You referenced quite a bit that you're currently undergoing. Within this framework, from my perspective, should give you a clear understanding of where you should be.
So I'll give a couple of quick examples, cognizant of time. First of all, what we're going to do is we are going to take the lens that the bill presents, particularly the definitions of disability and of barrier, and we're going to integrate those into everything we do that's related to accessibility. So the bill does provide a bit of an overarching framework, a kind of a way of thinking about accessibility, which the CTA agrees with and that we'll integrate into our work. More concretely, the additional powers that our enforcement officers will have to go and inspect, to impose administrative monetary penalties if necessary, to negotiate compliance plans with regulated entities. I think that those additional tools, those additional powers will help our folks in the field working with service providers like the two represented here today and hundreds of others to actually, on a day-to-day basis, in a very concrete way, advance accessibility. There are some new ways that our folks who are out there working every day with service providers will have to make sure that the goals of the legislation and our regulations move forward.
Okay. Given that environment and your mandate where you're going, will it be easier to achieve that with Bill C-81?
Certainly the additional tools that Bill C-81 will give us to advance the mandate will be helpful.
Okay. Could you tell us currently how does the CTA handle accessibility-related complaints today, and how will this change under Bill C-81?
So I'll briefly explain for the member and other members that we really do at the CTA have two roles. We're the regulator, we set the rules, but we also hear complaints from individual Canadians or from advocacy organizations about concerns they might have, including around accessibility. When somebody comes forward to us with a complaint, the first thing that we'll try to do is see if we can arrive at a resolution between the complainant and the service provider in an informal way through a mediation or a facilitation process, because in many respects it's better for all concerned if we don't have to go all the way to adjudication, which is more court-like. But if we're not able to achieve a resolution through an informal process, or if the two parties aren't interested in engaging in those discussions, then we convene like a court of law. We have all the powers of a superior court. We hear evidence, we hear arguments, and we issue binding decisions. I will tell you that the trend line on accessibility complaints is upward. 4 years ago, we received about 25 accessibility complaints in 2014-15, I think that's the right year. That number doubled the next year, tripled the next year, and last year it was about 100 accessibility-related complaints. So as we've, pardon me?
What's driving that? What's the primary?
You know, I think that there's a number of drivers. As an organization, we've made efforts to ensure that persons with disabilities are aware that they can turn to us for assistance if they've got an issue.
Yeah.
So we've done public information efforts, undertaken public information efforts, but I think generally, and this committee's work is, I think, an example of that, there's more attention today than there was several years ago to accessibility issues and to the fundamental right of people with disabilities to equal access to transportation services. So I think we've contributed as an organization, but I think it's part of a broader societal trend.
1 second or
1 minute.
1 minute. What's that? Yes, you did. You didn't get to the part which was what will change under Bill C-81.
So a number of things will change under Bill C-81. As I already mentioned, our compliance officers will have more authority. The size of administrative monetary penalties, AMPs, the maximum AMP that they can impose will go from $25,000 to $250,000. Now, of course, they're not going to jump to that AMP in the first instance of noncompliance, but the option is there to go to a much more significant administrative monetary penalty. The bill would see us administering a participant funding program, which is a way of allowing persons with disabilities to access funding so that they can pursue applications before the CTA that might otherwise be too expensive for them. And finally, the bill will allow the CTA to undertake inquiries at its own initiative with the agreement of the Minister of Transport into systemic accessibility issues. Currently, we don't have that power. We can undertake inquiries if we receive a complaint, but we can't undertake inquiries on our own initiative that are systemic in nature. If the bill is passed in its current form, we'll have that authority.
Thank you very much, and we will have to stop there. I would, on behalf of the committee, like to thank everybody for being here today and coming to the committee via video conference. We are going to suspend for just a few moments so that we can switch panels. So we'll be right back. Suspend. Folks, if we could just take our seats, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, we're just going to get started here. Welcome back, everybody. This is our second panel this evening, and for those that are joining us, I'm not going to go through the preamble entirely again, just to remind you that we do have both in French and English sign language. And I'm sorry, sir, but you're going to have to put your phone away at the back there. Thank you. There's no photos at this time. Thank you. Yeah, so there's both French and English sign language. And just to keep your remarks, both your opening and closing remarks, and answering of any questions, keep your speech to a fairly even pace. If you're going too fast, I will just sort of stop you, and so I apologize in advance if I interrupt, but we want to make sure that everything is captured appropriately. Joining us now, we have via video conference from Surrey, BC, from the Council of Canadians with Disabilities. We have Jules Smith, chairperson. Welcome. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thank you. And is Stephen joining you or no?
I thought
Stephen's
Stephen
with
was
us
in the
here.
room.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's right. Hello.
Hi.
Yes. We have Stephen Esty, Government and Community Relations Officer. Welcome. And then we have also here today in person, we have from the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, Robert Giz, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Ursula Grom, Senior Director, Industry Affairs. Welcome to both of you. And then finally from Communication Disabilities Access Canada, Barbara Collier, Executive Director. Welcome. And we have 5 minutes, yeah? Okay, so we're going to start with Joel Smith and Stephen Esty, Council of Canadians with Disabilities. The next 5 minutes are all yours.
Thank you. So I believe Steve and I agreed that I would go first. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak with everyone. We have a number of items that through consultations across the country we've come to agreement upon, and I know you'll hear from many of my colleagues over the next few days. The first thing is that we are very much hoping that the bill will address the timelines of implementation. We would very much like to see challenging timelines to be established, such as 5 years. Canada is not the first country to put accessibility legislation in place, and there are many examples to draw from. And we've been consulted extensively, and I believe the government could easily meet a 5-year timeline of establishing a barrier-free Canada. We would also like the Act to better address effective management and complaints. We think that the fractured current status of the Act would make it very difficult for individuals with disabilities to be able to make complaints and to also have their needs met and their accessibility addressed. We would also very much like to see ASL and LSQ acknowledged as official languages for deaf individuals. 45 countries have acknowledged deaf languages to date, and we think that Canada is falling behind in not doing so. This is different than official status language. This is acknowledging that for deaf people, ASL, LSQ, and Indigenous signed languages are critical for their ability to have an accessible experience with services and with their rights. We would also like to see the CASDO board comprised of a minimum of 2/3 of persons with disabilities. We have seen many examples in the past where boards were consistent at a 50 plus 1% And in those cases, too often, our true needs are not met. And we would ultimately love to see 100%, but realizing that this may not be possible, we're asking for 2/3. We would like to also see the federal accessibility agencies that are set up to be at arm's length from government, and this would allow them to go about doing their businesses and better serve the needs of persons with disabilities. And finally, from my points, and then I'll pass to Steve, we think it's very important that Indigenous people with disabilities be consulted, as currently they are not mentioned in the Act. And although Indigenous nation-to-nation work is being done, the particular needs of the Indigenous individuals with disabilities need to be addressed in order for a fully accessible Canada. Thank you, and I'll pass on to Steve Este.
Thanks very much. I wasn't actually aware we were splitting our 5 minutes, so I'll try and make good use of my 2.5. Couple of quick things here. We've heard over the course of the last few weeks the discussion about the idea of introducing a no wrong door policy with regard to complaints mechanism and so on. And I just wanted to share with you that within our community there's been some concerns raised about that, particularly from the mental health community in Canada. This approach has been used for a number of years and it's led to some concerns and problems. So we talked to people with the organization, and they said that there were better ways of doing things. The concern with the no wrong door thing is decisions get made on the inside. There's no transparency and so on. So there's a real concern about it. We just wanted to flag that. The second thing, a little bit more positively, wanted to say how excited we are to realize that the Act will recognize the Canadian Human Rights Commission as a domestic monitoring mechanism for the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. We think that's a tremendously important provision, and we're really pleased to see it. In paragraph 149 of the Act, or section 149, talks about this specifically, and we wanted to make a suggestion that, along with the recognition of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which is a very important thing, and in tune with the Convention itself, we wanted to suggest that consideration begin to language to also flag the participation of individuals with disabilities and our organizations specifically, so that it would be made explicit in a sentence at the end of 149 to talk not just about the Human Rights Commission, but about organizations of people with disabilities in the same way that the Convention makes a distinction between national institutions and organizations of people with disabilities. We felt that it would be important to get that in the Act itself so that we can revisit that when the time comes. Thanks very much.
Thank you both. And now from Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, Mr. Giz and Ms. Grom, the next 5 minutes are yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening representing the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association, which I'll refer to as the CWTA. I'm joined this evening by Ursula Grom-Grant, our Senior Director of Industry Affairs, who is our lead on accessibility and will most likely be taking the majority of your questions. CWTA is the authority on wireless issues, developments, and trends in Canada. We represent service providers as well as companies that develop products and services for the wireless industry. We're pleased to be here today to share the views of our members regarding Bill C-81. I would like to begin by confirming that our members strongly support the intent behind this legislation. An accessible Canada is a vision we all support. Je tiens à confirmer d'entrée.
I would like to begin by confirming that our members strongly support the intent behind this legislation. An accessible Canada is a vision we all support.
Full participation. These are the goals of the members of the CWTA that we're fully behind. And if Bill C-81 can bring Canada closer to these goals, then we want to be part of that. We commend the government for working towards these goals. Indeed, for years, members of the CWTA have been working in concert to ensure the services we provide are accessible to all Canadians. Today, our wireless networks offer fast and reliable mobile connectivity, with the current generation of wireless technology known as LTE or 4G being available to approximately 98.5% of all Canadians and offering the fastest average download speeds in the G7 and twice as fast as the United States. To make sure as many Canadians as possible can access the benefits of these networks, our members have worked hard in recent years to improve accessibility in relation to telecommunication services. Examples relevant to wireless telecommunications in particular include accessible websites and online content, wireless rate plans to accommodate unique needs, wireless devices that offer accessibility features and functionalities, and services like text with 911 and IP relay. Special web pages with information on accessible products and services, and accessible formats for bills and other documents and information. Our members will continue to work hard to address accessibility issues and work collaboratively with stakeholders across Canada to keep improving in this area. In this spirit, we very much welcome the broad thrust of Bill C-81. In particular, the current draft of the legislation addresses several key concerns we shared through the consultation process that preceded the development of the bill. We're pleased to see the CRTC will continue in its current role with regard to regulation of accessibility. This provides continuity, understanding, and clarity to our members. It also ensures Canadians will continue to benefit from public processes that are accessible to Canadians with binding determinations all stakeholders can understand and follow. Even as we are pleased to see the CRTC's continued role, we do have some concerns regarding the details and clarity around next steps. Much of the bill remains aspirational. While the goals are ones we all share and should work toward, it has been difficult to provide feedback without a better and more detailed sense of the regulations that will follow in its wake. To give one example, while the CRTC will retain jurisdiction over the telecom products and service aspects of a Canadian carrier, another new regulatory body will provide oversight on other parts of the business. In addition, some provincial jurisdictions also have accessibility legislation, and we will need to understand where that fits in. This could work well, or it could create unnecessary overlap, duplication, and uncertainty, ultimately harming the interests of the very Canadians the legislation is seeking to assist. The details matter, and the regulations that will be created further to this legislation could have a significant impact, potentially negative as well. A number of jurisdictions in Canada have similar legislation in place, with applicable standards and similar goals to this bill. If we don't work closely together, competing and possibly contradictory standards could arise, harming the efforts of all concerned. Therefore, we urge this committee to recognize the importance of continued consultation once Bill C-81 is passed and proclaimed. Moving forward will be an education process for everyone, and our members want to see this happen in the most efficient and effective way possible. Les prochaines étapes seront une occasion.
Moving forward will be an education process for everyone, and our members want to see this happen in the most efficient and effective way possible.
The opportunity, and we'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And finally, from Communication Disabilities Access Canada, Barbara Collier, Executive Director, 5 minutes.
Good evening, committee members. I'm delighted to be here this evening and honoured to represent Communication Disabilities Access Canada. And this is a non-profit national organisation that promotes accessibility for people who have speech and language disabilities that are not caused by hearing loss. And I need to take a minute to tell you a bit about who we're talking about and then to tell you a bit about what access means for them. So I'm going to focus on the needs of 500,000 Canadians who have a wide range of disabilities that affect how they communicate. We're talking about people who have cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, learning disability, ALS, traumatic brain injury, aphasia after a stroke, Parkinson's, and I could go on and list about 60 disabilities that affect how people communicate with you in their speech or understand what you're saying to them. So this is not a small marginalized population. This is a huge population. And it's a population that has got very little attention. They are off the radar when it comes to looking at accessibility needs of this group. And I'm going to tell you how we think Bill C-81 can be strengthened to include the needs of people with speech and language disabilities. At this time, the bill talks about priority areas. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. I'm going to have to reference them. Employment, built environment, procurement of goods and services, program and service delivery, transportation, and information and communication technologies. We propose that communication should be addressed in a much broader context than information and communication technologies. Now, we have analysed accessibility guidelines, standards all across the country, and I can tell you that usually it's about respect and attitudes, it's about plain language, it's about accessible websites, and it's about alternate formats and sign language, and these are incredibly important. But they are not addressing the needs of people who have speech and language disabilities. And I want to say that the people who have speech and language disabilities may have difficulty. They may have little or no speech. They may use pictures, letterboards, or speech-generating devices to communicate, or may they have difficulty comprehending what you're saying. Communication traditionally is looked at as giving information, getting information into people's heads. We're saying it's about two-way. It's about expression and it's about comprehension. And it occurs in all jurisdictions that interact with the public, in face-to-face interactions, telephone and telecommunications, reading and writing, public forums, meetings like this. These are the contexts that are important and that people need access to. And that will, if we just look at information and communication, we're going to miss it. We are absolutely going to miss it. So we're asking the government to amend the bill to include communication as a generic building block that needs to be in place for all jurisdictions. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But we're also asking that there's another building block that we need to put in place, and that building block should have everything to do with discrimination, attitudes, accessibility rights, diversity, and equity. That's one building block. The other block is communication. And what we want is that all jurisdictions have training in how to interact with people whose speech may be unclear, who use a communication device, who have a communication assistant, or who need a communication assistant. That's the sort of thing that will make meaningful changes. We are then asking that across the board, so you've got the two domains, building blocks in place, then adapt them. Let's have our federal courts take the general communication training and then look at their own context. And in that, we want communication intermediaries to be available to victims, witnesses, and accused who need to communicate in that context. We need Service Canada to be able to communicate with people on the telephone or offer the appropriate text-based communication alternatives. We need Elections Canada to offer online voting that people can use their own assisted devices and not suddenly have to learn how to use a I can't even speak, a sip and puff switch or a scanner that they've never seen before when they go in to vote. We have the solutions. The solutions are there. We just need to put them in place, and it's all very achievable. I'll say one more thing. I can see you smiling at me, Mr. Chairman, but I don't get a chance to speak very often. We want most of the barriers and the frustrations of people with speech and language disabilities are because they have no access to communication devices and the supports that they need to access the services. They would like the federal government to expand its role, not just to negotiate how standards, accessibility standards can be across the country, but that we can work together, the governments can work together to ensure that people have what they need to communicate with their services. Are the lights dimming at this point? I think they are. The music is coming up.
The band is about to play, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
First up with 6 minutes of questions, MP Folk, please.
Perfect. Thank you all for being here today. I have a question. I believe it would be for Ms. Smith. You had mentioned deaf languages, so and having that be officially recognized. So could you explain to me what you mean by that and how that would be achieved?
Sure. I'm having a lot of feedback here. Are you able to hear me just as well?
Yes.
Okay. Having deaf languages recognized federally would ensure that services such as when a deaf person goes in to get their passport or going through the court system or accessing any other services, that first of all, their language would be recognized as the way that they communicate. So that is one example. Another example would be ensuring that all important documents that the federal government produces have a video of ASL and LSQ available for deaf individuals to watch so that they would understand the document better. The syntax and structure of deaf languages is quite different than written English and French, and many times deaf individuals struggle when trying to access languages. Much like with the Accessibility Act, we're encouraging plain language. We would like to see added the recognition of ASL, LSQ, and as conversation progresses with Indigenous communities, any of the Indigenous signed languages.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I guess, I know it's even in our last meeting that we had, plain language. How, Ms. Collier, I'm wondering if you could touch on this for me. How would that, or how are stakeholders or the disability community looking to have that implemented into C81? So how because I understand what plain language means, but how would that be put into legislation?
Well, if you take what I've said as communication as an umbrella, if you prioritize that as the domain that needs to be addressed, then plain language falls into reading and writing within that. And it's part of that. And plain language, as you know what it is, it needs to be put into the, I see it as fitting very much into the communication domain, but it won't fit if you're just going to use information and communication technologies. There's no place to plug it into that. It needs to be a bigger picture of it. I don't know if I've answered your question.
So
I'm not
do you
sure.
mean as in referencing plain language? Like I understand
what do you mean?
How it could be used day to day. But how do we put that into legislation or even the regulations? Like, is there a better fit for that to be either legislation or regulation, I guess?
I'm not a policy maker on that, but I can certainly see how it would fit into a standard that says that written material has to be accessible and follow the principles of easy read or plain language.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add? No.
Smith.
Yeah.
I think this also can fall under the conversation about adding communication as a specific barrier. So we currently have under the Act 6 identified barriers that would be focused on. We strongly think that communication is a 7th. And then in the regulation and development, it would become addressed. I know that there is a lot of push to have plain language used and also ASL, LSQ, and also look at communication in general. And much as my colleague Barbara talked about, but we strongly feel it falls under that area that wasn't identified specifically. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Another question I would have, I want to understand timelines, what people are, or what different stakeholders or different people within the disability community find acceptable as a timeline. I've heard a lot from even individual meetings that I've had in my offices, but nobody has been able to give, or is willing to give me a timeline that would be sufficient. So I'm just wondering if I could hear from everybody and know what would be proposed as a timeline to be added to the legislation.
Because I know I brought it up. So CCD is part of a larger group of disability organizations, and we've worked really hard over a several day period of time working this out. So I'm going to read the language that we established. For substantive and progressive change, a deadline date must be set within a 5-year period following royal assent of approval for approval of all standards and regulations in each specific area required. A deadline for full implementation of each standard and regulation following their approval must be set within an 18-month period, and it must be understood that there will always be continual progression toward a barrier-free society. It's not realistic to think that a deadline date will mark full compliance or completion, but that a review must occur every 3 years and a public report of progress must be developed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now over to MP Long, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses this evening. I really appreciate your testimony. It's very, very, very enlightening. I certainly know this. Last meeting, I talked about where I live in St. John Rosse, and coming upon a lady in a wheelchair who was literally waiting to be able to get from the car park into the mall. And my question was, well, why are you waiting here? And there was no way for her to get in unless somebody opened that door and let her in. And this is a public spot in my city. So, you know, C81 is going to break down barriers. It's going to open up the world for people with disabilities. Ms. Smith, Mr. Esty, Ms. Smith, I want to thank you for taking the time to come to my office. I know we met here, I think, a couple weeks ago, and I really appreciate the conversation. And I wanted to follow up on something that we did talk about, was the composition of the CASTO board. And I know we talked about it in the office, 50 plus 1. I know you don't think that's good enough, and I certainly respect that. I know you want to see 70%. From my past experience as a business person, being involved in different boards, the composition of boards is critical. Whether it's a bank, a hockey team, CASTO, what have you. So, we continue to hear, Ms. Smith in particular, from other witnesses too, just about their concern about the composition of the board. So, do you want to elaborate on that? I know you talked about you'd like to see 70%. There are those that suggest that, language in section 23.2 be amended to ensure that members of CASTO boards with lived experience with disabilities represent as much as practically possible, the diversity of disability communities in Canada. So, can the language of 23.2 be amended? And can you just share with us again the importance of composition of the CASTO board? Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe,
great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
So we would like to see the largest possible percentage. I would love to see 100%. I think that people with disabilities exist everywhere, and there is no reason that people with particular expertise couldn't be using their situation of employment to sit on the CASTO as well. But we are willing to go as low as 2/3. As I mentioned before, 50 plus 1%, we've seen many boards like that, and often what happens is that plus one gets convinced not to attend a meeting, so they don't vote in favor of things that would be progressive for us and such. And I also think that, Minister Qualtrough clearly stated we need to move beyond the slogan, nothing about us without us, to just nothing about us. So we need to always be there. We need to always be at the table. I'm a PhD candidate myself. I have plenty of colleagues who are experts in their fields. There is no reason this composition can't be diverse and fully realize us at the table.
But you come up with 70%. I know you mentioned 70% in our meeting. Why not 100%? Is it necessary to allocate seats to members of each disability community on the board?
I personally was advocating for 100%. FALA, which was the group we were meeting, we agreed to say 70% or 2/3 as a group.
You'd like to see 100.
I would like to see 100. And I think that diversity can be represented. It's not a checklist. It's looking at the composition of a group and understanding that our population is quite diverse. Not just have people represented checking off, oh, we have one deaf person, one person using a wheelchair, one person with vision impairment. I mean, looking at diversity and looking at access and knowledge, I think would be really critical.
Thank you very much. Mr. Esty, do you have anything you want to contribute to that? Oh, okay, sorry.
Thanks. I communicate with captioning, and I'm deaf, and it takes a second or two for it to come up on the screen. It's not that I'm not paying attention.
My apologies.
I think that Jules has made the point quite clearly. I think, there's a diversity in the disability community, and the discussions that we've had since the bill was tabled around the representation, the number of people, percentages on these boards and so on, we started off looking at it saying 50% plus one would probably be okay, but there's been a real push by some members of the community to have a higher level of representation, and it goes particularly to the diversity of the disability experience, and the concern that if you've only got 50% of the people, then you may not have a wide enough perspective on a particular issue. So we want to ensure that that's the case here, and that's, as I understand, the rationale here. Thank you.
Ms. Collier?
Yes, I would agree with 2/3, and the reason for that is that when we talk about communication access, we're talking about a very, very diverse population. People who have been born with disability that makes it very difficult for them to learn language and literacy. It's very different from somebody who's had a stroke and has that language. You can't have one or two people represent the whole diverse population of communication disabilities. We would support absolutely that you need representation on the Standards Committee of people with lived experience, but you also need representative of the disability organisation that can speak to the larger scope of things. Because people with communication disabilities are not necessarily speech-language pathologists with masters and PhDs in communication disabilities. So you need both.
Thank you very much. MP Hardcastle, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to Mr. Etsy and Ms. Smith, if you can talk a little bit more about the real operational independence of the new agencies. There was concern about that independence in reporting to government, and perhaps they should be reporting directly to Parliament. Would you talk about the independence of organizations like CASDO, the Accessibility Commissioner, and the Chief Accessibility Officer?
I'm not sure who's starting here. Okay. I mean, I think that that our preference would be for a mechanism to be put in place, direct reporting to Parliament. Because of the whole independence issue, we certainly would support that approach and revision to that effect.
Ms. Smith?
So there was a lot of feedback when you were asking your question, but I did get, do you want to just repeat it?
The independence of the new offices. You'd like to see reporting to Parliament?
We would very much like to see that. We feel to some extent that the current way that Bill C-81 is set up with a number of fractured reporting systems might be problematic. A couple of those organizations we've dealt with as the disability community in the past and had multiple barriers, and we feel like it's important to have that arm's length reporting in order to address some of those barriers and challenges, and also to set up a fresh mechanism that wouldn't operate under necessarily the mandate of the current government, but would operate under the mandate of disability community.
Thank you. And Ms. Collier, can you elaborate a little bit on your concern with regards to entities, organizations, or jurisdictions that would be exempted right now under the proposed bill, the exemptions? Do you have any concerns that perhaps we should be looking at amendments or at least allowing for an appeal process? Or that decisions have to be provided when exemptions are made?
I'm hoping I understand your question. Are you asking about the CRTC exemptions?
Yeah,
yes.
CRTC
and transportation. I would apply the generic communication training and information to all jurisdictions, especially the CRTC and transportation. They would be included in this. How to communicate with people, what their barriers are. And I can speak a little bit about some of the concerns for the CRTC. First of all, I need to say that we have never surveyed people with speech and language disabilities. We have no data to research that population and the barriers they face. So what I'm telling you are anecdotal. They're saying that there are message relay services available to people who have hearing loss to use. They say that they are available for people who are speech impaired. People who have dysarthria, slurred speech due to cerebral palsy or a stroke, are saying that the operators have no training in how to facilitate speech-to-speech for them, so they don't use it. It's also not known, it's not marketed to them. We could see an enormous opportunity to expand that service for people with speech and language. Smartphones are being used more and more by people with disabilities. We have people in long-term care facilities who need phones in order to leave the hospital to live in the community for safety. The problem is the cost of the phone for them, the switch access to the phone because they can't operate it with their fingers, and there's no funding for this. But also I'm hearing it's the data plan and the plans themselves for the telephone use. It may be there for internet, and I'm not an expert in this, but I'm hearing there are major concerns around keeping up with the technology, specifically for people who have communication disabilities who are not deaf or hard of hearing. So I would say, and for transportation across the board.
Ms. Smith, can you give us some of your comments with regards to concerns about exemptions?
Sure. We're concerned that the exemptions will result in continued barriers for individuals with disabilities. We have dealt with CRTC and other groups that would fall under some of these exemptions for decades. And whenever there's an opportunity for them to have an exemption, they choose not to move forward the mandate of accessibility. And we feel very strongly that this act should clear a path to remove those barriers and to address the issues, which are not that difficult. As my colleague has just mentioned, there are opportunities with smartphones, there is training that's available, there is a wealth of research that these exemptions should not be there, that a barrier-free Canada is possible. We just have to decide to do it as a nation.
Thank you very much. And for 6 minutes, MP Sanga, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for everyone coming here and giving this input. Now, my question is again to Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, you are talking about the Canadian Accessibility Standard Organization, I know this is going to be a very exclusive type of organization which is going to make better standards for regulation, bring changes into the regulations. You talked about regarding the difficulty of complaints, and you wanted some sort of reforms. What type of reforms you're looking for to have better complaint process?
Sure. So the current way that the bill is written, the complaints falls under many different ways. And I know that the government has so far been pushing for every door, they're calling it every door something. But we're concerned that individuals will have a complaint and not know who they should go to, go through the wrong door, and possibly it could take 2 or 3 years to resolve an issue. What we would like to see is that CASDO be responsible for developing the regulations, and that the reporting of any complaints go through one organization. Whether that organization has individuals underneath, for example, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and then potentially several individuals underneath who would manage complaints, but that people would know where they go when they have a complaint about federal accessibility. Not that you might go to the CRTC for this, and you might have to call Services Canada for that for a complaint, or you might have to call a specific airline for another complaint, but one place for people to call and have their complaints directed, one organization to develop the regulations and to provide a disability lens in the writing of those regulations. And I don't mean any disability lens, I mean a human rights disability lens. And to provide, also to do work on the intersectionality that I know government has attempted to do through the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, which has not been very successful for the disability community, which is why we strongly feel that one organization being responsible for the complaints and for the management of regulations is critical, so that across the board we have equal access, a clear understanding of barriers and what accessibility looks like. Thank you.
Secondly, when we are now looking for barrier-free Canada, and we want it now, it should be done now, and we want that things should follow as soon as possible. Why you are looking for 5 years timeline then?
Canada has done a lot of work in several of our provinces on accessibility and disability legislation. We also have the example of numerous countries around the world who have done this work already. We're not reinventing the wheel. We have great examples. We also know of some of the challenges and issues that have occurred during the consultation process over the last 2 and a bit years. The government has gathered much information on accessibility that works in other countries and in our own. And we feel like setting up extremely long timelines will just result in us, perhaps not living to see a barrier-free Canada.
So you think 5 years timeline will provide better resolutions than the immediately taking action now?
I think where we can, immediate action is critical. There are things that are easily done right away. We're saying 5 years for the regulations and such to be set up with the new, to be fully set up within the new organizations that are being developed. We know that there is some work in setting up a new department. We understand there's some work in setting up and reviewing regulations and making sure provincial and federal don't misalign and that there won't be problems in that sense. But we also want to hurry along the process. We don't think it needs to take 20 years. Whatever is possible, we would love to see it done within a year, but we're also recognizing government has an election coming up and such too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And MP Rumi, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I will say up front that I will be sharing my time with Parliamentary Secretary Young. This thing with timelines has been going around my head. And when I was listening to your testimony, Ms. Collier, it actually just clicked in to me as to why we shouldn't be putting timelines in the legislation. The things that you're mentioning, it's enormous. There's so many different, let me finish. There's so many different things that are out there that if we start to try to legislate every single piece, we won't get to where we need to go. And I see this as an evolution of this whole process, because technology is changing, people are changing, and when you try to legislate that change, it actually stops you from moving forward. So I don't have any questions. I just needed to share that with you, and I'm going to let P.S. Young take over.
Well, thank you very much. And I think you did want to mention something or say something to Dan's comment.
I just wanted to say that I was stressing the scope of the issue of communication access, but I think it's very, very doable. 90% of what I'm talking about is education. And I think we have the education resources that could be put in place. What we need is a standard to say, everyone needs training in how to communicate with people who communicate in different ways. It's very, very doable. The other part, to develop the intermediaries for the federal courts and the communication assistants to assist people at public forums, that's going to take longer. That's a support service that needs to be developed in the same way as sign language services have been developed. But I think it's very doable, and it's not a huge cost to educate people. Thank you for your question and for bringing that up.
And thank you very much for your input. I did want to, and I don't know how much time I have left. Oh, okay. Well, I did want to read a quote that our accessibility minister, Qualtrough, said when she was appearing before the committee, and it was about timelines. And I think it's important for us to hear what the minister was saying and why she is thinking that timelines are not necessary. She said, "We also want people to get moving on this now. We don't want to say that we're going to have an accessible Canada by 2025 or 2030, and then people sit back and say, okay, I have time. We need to do this now. It's like giving people a reason to wait instead of requiring people to do something now. And given that we want to spur immediate action, do you believe that timelines will help speed up the action to get us where we need to get to?" Mr. Esty, would you like to take that on?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I come from Nova Scotia, and we've just gone through this process in our province, developing accessibility legislation. And when the first reading happened in Nova Scotia, there were no timelines in the legislation at all. And the disability community there got up in arms about that and were concerned about the lack of any kind of timelines, and concern being if you don't have a wall against which to backstop things, then how do you measure your progress? How do you what's the right word? How do you compel people to do something without a fixed date? And we were able to get the government in Nova Scotia to put a fixed date in the legislation. We've had some discussion about that experience federally over the last, since June 21st when you tabled the legislation, and its lack of a fixed date. And what I've heard, and I think as Jules mentioned, the idea of not having one particular date globally, but to look at it segmenting out different areas of the legislation, different pieces. It's a very complicated thing, Bill C-81, and to say one date fits all is going to create difficulties, I think. But at the same time, without some kind of a firm wall, a backstop against which to measure, we have a concern as a disability community that it's never going to come. You know, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes, kind of a thing.
Flexibility is important. I'm not sure it
Having
came up.
technological problems here.
Okay. I just wanted to insert the word flexibility into what you're saying, that's necessary, not maybe a direct timeline.
I think that there can be flexibility, sure, but I do think there needs to be some way for us to measure and things. So some kinds of timelines and deadlines need to be negotiated at some point. I'm not sure exactly what that point is.
Thank you very much. And we have about just shy of 2 minutes left. MP Finley, would like to close this out?
Well, before I make a question or submit a question, I do have to make a comment in that there is so much flexibility in this bill as it's written that it never has to come into force. Standard provision in any bill is a coming into force date, and that does not exist. So even if the bill passes and gets royal assent, there is absolutely no requirement on the government to bring it into effect. That means that all the good talk here, all the good intentions will go nowhere. And I personally have a real problem with that. But my question is for Mr. Gitz. Given your unique background as a legislator and also one who is, in many cases, representing the private sector now, what are your reactions to the differences in requirements of government departments and federally regulated industries and interests in as much as the exemptions that apply to government departments who choose not to participate or versus the private sector, or things like penalties for non-compliance?
Good question. I do want to touch a little bit on timelines. I realize what the minister said, but I'll back up. I think what what Ms. Young said, and that was around flexibility. And I think all legislation, when you used to bring in legislation, if you put a specific timeline on something, and you miss that timeline, you're going to be criticized and you're going to have a lot of difficulty. So I think flexibility with regards to any legislation is extremely important. And also I want to go back and talk about making sure that the consultations and everyone involved at the table is there. Now I go with Mr. Esty too, and I called a bit of a catch-22. If you don't have a timeline, then you could say that let's get it done right away. Or it may not compel people to want to deal with things right away as well. So there is a bit of a catch-22 there, but I think that if you work with the word flexibility, you'll find a way to get there and keep everyone at the table. With regards to different provisions, you got to realize uniqueness that exists, and there are going to have to be some special provisions, but ensuring that everyone realizes why they're in place, and I think people talked about education before, is going to be a key to that. So understanding why the CRTC is responsible for certain areas. We heard from the airport folks before. I think that we are unique. There's not a one-size-fits-all. I do agree with, I think it's Ms. Smith who mentioned that there is a plethora of information out there on different provinces doing things as well as other countries. We don't need to copy what everyone else does, but we can pick and choose on what best fits Canadian society.
Thank you very much. And I have to cut it there, unfortunately. But I wanted to just take the opportunity to thank all of you for helping us with this study, this bill, and for being here today and joining us via video conference. And thank you to my colleagues, and of course, as always, everybody that makes today possible. And there are more of you on this study than normal. So thank you all very, very much. Adjourned.